It's the end of week 5 of Diddy on trial. The hip-hop mogul has pleaded not guilty to charges including sex trafficking, transportation to engage in prostitution, and racketeering conspiracy. He's facing life in prison. I'm Carlos Greer, senior reporter at Page 6, and I've got questions. Here with the latest on Diddy's court case is entertainment lawyer, former litigator, and legal correspondent Lisa Bonner. How you doing, Lisa?
Hi, Carlos. How are you today?
All good. Let's dive in. I mean, Diddy, he's more than halfway through the trial, and he's fighting for his life. You've been following this trial very closely. What have been the key takeaways from some of the testimonies this week? What stood out to you?
Well, Jane was on the stand for most of the week. We started the week with her cross-examination, and Jane was a very complex witness, as we have seen. The prosecution brought her to the stand to essentially show that there was a pattern of behavior and that Combs sex trafficked her.
Right.
Her testimony was very graphic. She was very detailed. At times she was crying and sniffling and all very much in her feelings, obviously. And so she did give a very straightforward and, like I said, heartfelt and graphic direct examination. However, when the defense brought her to the stand for cross-examination, they were very, let's say, direct in their questioning to basically want to set the stage, this show that Jane was there consensually. And that has been the defense's entire defense throughout this entire trial, that the victims, alleged victims, were there on their own free will. They had consent. They were free to leave whenever they wanted to. And however, each one that we have seen, from Cassie to Mia to Jane, have really shown a very complex relationship, if you will. They all showed allegiance to him. They all professed their love and adoration for Combs. And Mia did the same. And last week or 2 weeks ago, and Jane was really no different. But the defense was very, very defiant and very straightforward about really pushing back and really showing that she was very consensual in these alleged hotel nights. Right. So that was my biggest takeaway. She was a very complex witness.
Okay. And Jane and Mia, they are two alleged victims who are going by the pseudonyms Jane
Correct.
and Mia. So now we know who the three victims are.
Alleged victims.
The alleged victims. So we know who they are. How, now that we've heard from them, how have their testimonies moved? Well, how did Jane's testimony this week, how did it move the needle forward for the prosecution's case?
I've been thinking about this and really trying to analyze it from both parts, right? It's like I said, she gave very effective direct direct examination by the prosecution. Like I said, the defense was very effective, if I had to choose a word, to really talk about, and so all they need to do is show reasonable doubt in the mind of one juror. So, and her ultimate, motion, if you will, when she left and when Jane got off the stand, she hugged the prosecutor, Maureen Comey, and then went over to hug the defense lawyer. So in this instance, it was very what is happening here? It left a lot of us stunned, because we do know that she had met with the defense lawyers plenty of times before she was called over to be a witness for the prosecution. We also know that Sean Diddy Combs was paying her not only her rent, but for the lawyer that she is used in this trial. So she could have some, mixed feelings and have some type of allegiance. She did say that she loved Combs. So I can't really say about how I feel about her testimony. I don't think it was the strongest. She did seem to at times weaponize, if you will, the hotel nights. When we did see one allegation of when Combs was on vacation with another woman, for example, she said, "Hey, if you come home, I'll do a hotel night for you." But again, what I've talked about before, that the sexual trauma is not always one dimensional. But I have to say, in the testimony that we saw, juxtaposing, and I'm not making any reference to people's trauma, only the testimony. Cassie's testimony was it was much more clear in my mind in terms of the fact that she seemed to be this young, innocent girl at the age of 19, 20, who really turned over her career, her heart, her entire livelihood to Combs, only to have these alleged beatings, these alleged blackmail, and really different efforts to escape, if you will, and was lured back. So her testimony was very strong. Mia, the other, I won't want to call her, she's not victim number 2 because they're not alleging that she was sex trafficked. They were just trying to show a pattern of sexual abuse, if you will. She also came across very, very strong for the prosecution. Again, with each one of them had complex relationships, if you will, with Combs. But in terms of I don't want to call it the trauma, but I guess the behavior and the relationship that the two had. So when you look at Jane and how she came across, she was very witty. She clapped back a lot, and she kept trying to say, you cannot really commercialize and you can't put a price on my body. So it's going to really come down to, in Jane's instance, whether the jury believes that she was sex trafficked by force, fraud, or coercion, or they really thought that she was in it for the perks and the lifestyle and really was there because she had maybe ulterior motives. We do know that she said that she was not planning to sue Combs, but does she come across as a ex-girlfriend who wanted more and who was there to extract revenge on him because she really never got more? So that's where we are. Yeah. I don't really know how I feel about Jane's testimony at this point.
Yeah, and
it's very complex.
Yeah, and the defense is certainly pushing that narrative that these are Correct. Women who wanted to be with Diddy for the fame, et cetera, et cetera. But, you know, there are a lot of stunning moments in this case. Friday, Kanye West, or Ye, if you will, he made an appearance. What was he doing there?
That is a very good question. I mean, you know, it's hard to take anything that Ye does seriously at this point. So I certainly can't offer any legal opinion on it. You know, a lot of times I feel as though he's just there to stir up controversy. I do know that he's been, you know, in Combs' corner and posting, you know, cryptic messages, if you will, on his social media posts. But I really don't know. He was there in and out. He was very brief. He wasn't there for any particular length of time. Mm-hmm. You know, he popped in kind of, you know, Thursday, alluding to the fact, if you will, that he might show up right. the next day. And he did. He came late and he left very early. So I don't know what he was doing there. I can't even really figure out. I don't try to opine on much Ye does anymore.
But Lisa, I mean, it is Diddy, so it's expected to be a media circus and celebs. But Kanye, he's a mega star and he's extremely polarizing. So, you know, how does having someone like Kanye in the courtroom, how does that affect the jury and their opinion of Diddy?
Well, he was not in the courtroom. He was in the overflow room. So the jury probably did not know that he was there. Remember, they're not supposed to be looking at any kind of news coverage about it or engaging on any type of social media. So they might not have even known that he was present. And the court, you know, is very, it's not as much as a media circus. I was there yesterday. It was not, there weren't very many protesters or free Diddy people. There weren't very many people out there outside the courthouse at all, except for, you know, the smattering of news, the news tents and things. But it has calmed down quite a bit.
And so you're not seeing tons of fans or pro Diddy or anti Diddy people out there. What I mean, you just said it, but what was that scene like for you yesterday when you were outside of the courthouse?
I was there with another news outlet, and we, you know, it was much less of a media spectacle than I had anticipated. There were, like I said, there weren't very many protesters. They had about maybe 6 or 7 different tents that were there that were broadcasting or filming, updates across from the entrance to the court, where people go in and out, and that was it. If you might not, it was very underwhelming from maybe, I think people have gone in and people have gone down and now they're just like, yeah. So it was very underwhelming.
Yeah, it wasn't the Diddy circus that you would
No.
expect. Got it. So
I think after 5 or 6, going into the 6th week of testimony,
Yeah.
people have really
it's died down.
yeah.
Well, I asked you this last week, and of course, I know that, it's up to the jury. But, there's only a few more weeks left. So based on the testimonies from these past 5 weeks, in your legal opinion, what are the chances that Diddy will walk free?
Well, let me just be clear. Again, we talked about it. It's up to the jury, and it's going to come down to closing arguments and, the jury instructions and things of that sort. However, just as we saw in the in Harvey Weinstein's verdict a few days ago, if you will, there is a very big possibility that he could have a split verdict. For example, Diddy could be found guilty, for example, just me opining on the 2 counts of transportation for the purposes of prostitution. They've pretty much clearly proven that Diddy had engaged and brought prostitutes across state lines for the purposes of commercial sex acts. And that's really clear in the statute. So he could be found guilty of that. He could be found, for example, guilty of what we talked about, Jane versus Cassie's testimony. He also could be found guilty of maybe 1 count of sex trafficking, just maybe 1. So it's so hard to really get into the juror's mind, right? And if you're not there all day, every day, we're not hearing the voluminous amount of testimony, if you will, that each juror is hearing all day, every day. And it's important to remember that we don't know who are the alternates and who are the jurors that are going to be deliberating. And so it's 18 people in there, and it's going to come down to 12 of those 18 in the jury room. And like we saw in Harvey Weinstein's trial, people have very strong opinions. And the reason I say it's going to come down to the jury instructions and the law is because what the judge gives, the defense and the prosecution work together. And I'm sure that they've been doing this already. And it's a very long and tedious and arduous process about really giving these instructions to the jury about what they are to consider in each count. And then you take that and they break it down and they break out what the New York statute is for each of these alleged crimes. So it is very possible, like I said, that the jurors could argue over whether or not that they thought consent was given in either one of these sex trafficking counts. They could also look and talk about the RICO charge, for example. Now, if we talk about RICO, the underlying, not the predicate crimes, but the underlying crime that they are alleging in the actual RICO charge is the sex trafficking. So they are saying that Combs used his commercial and human resources of his company to further his desires, protect and conceal his conduct and his reputation in furtherance of the sex trafficking. So that's what it basically comes down to. And through the RICO charge, as we've talked about before, you need to show only 2 predicate crimes. And we have talked about that they have shown very many of these. Some are circumstantial, but we do have direct evidence of the possession of narcotics with the intent to distribute. We have direct evidence of the fact that there are weapons charges. And today on Friday, there was someone, a special agent on the stand that talked about, again, the raid of his Los Angeles home and really discussed about how the arsenal of weapons that were there. Again, we saw this in Miami. We saw the arsenal of weapons that were alleged to be found in his home in Los Angeles with, magazines, AR-15, shotguns, rifles, some with, with scrubbed off serial numbers. So again, that is direct evidence of the weapons charges. So the predicate crimes, we only need two. And then you have to, again, look at the sex trafficking allegations. Was there a pattern of behavior from Combs and his people that worked for him to carry out these hotel nights, these freak offs? And were these consensual, or were these women brought in to engage in hotel nights and freak offs by force, fraud, or coercion?
Okay, so what should we pay attention to next week?
I'm very interested to see, I think next week might be the last week of direct testimony. So I'm very interested to see who the prosecution is going to bring on. And I think we talked about this here before, Carlos. We've heard about Christina Karam and her testimony for the past 5 to 6 weeks. Very many witnesses have talked about her their direct involvement with Christina Karam, who is Diddy's former chief of staff. It is also important to understand that a lot of the evidence that has come in from Christina Karam's phone, which was obtained by the prosecutors in March of 2024 at an airport. So it's, a lot of this direct testimony that we're getting from these witnesses have referenced Christina Karam and also the security guard D-Rock. Now, do we need them to come in? I would say they have done a very good job of proving this, that they have direct testimony from Christina Karam. But I'm here to tell you, as after sitting through 6 weeks and really listening to and reading and keeping up with this trial bit by bit, piece by piece, I think the prosecution's case would fall a bit flat if we don't have Christina Karam to be brought to the stand. Now, if the prosecution doesn't bring her, the defense might, which is why I'm saying the prosecution needs to get ahead of this, offer her an immunity deal, because there have been some serious allegations where she has been alleged to have been involved with a lot of the procurement of drugs, the covering up of evidence, of trying to obtain copies of the sex tape from the Hotel Intercontinental. So there's been a lot of testimony repeatedly from each witness that has come forth and talked about Christina Karam or KK. So if they do not bring her to the stand, I am really going to feel like that it's falling flat, because you do need the big summation of her testimony to really show not only did he have his assistants, his underlings, if you will, but he also had lieutenants, people that worked very closely with him, not under their direction, but with him. And we do seem to have Christina Karam was the most prevalent witness who has been alleged to have been participating in a lot of these underlying crimes. And also, I would love to see the prosecution bring D-Rock, his security guard, to the stand as well.
All right, well, we'll see. Thank you, Lisa. Always good to hear from you and get your perspective on what's happening with Diddy.
Thank you for having me, and I'll see you next week.
All right, now to stay up to date on all things Diddy and his trial, visit us at page6.com and watch us on YouTube.